In our last lesson, we used our multiplication and division fact families in order to help us learn the rules for division. And remember, we said before that if the numbers have the same signs in the division problem, they're both positive or they're both negative, then your result will be a positive number. And if your numbers have different signs, one's positive, one's negative, then when you divide the two numbers, your answer will be a negative number. And we're going to extend that today to look at how we can divide using fractions and decimals, also paying attention to our positive and negative symbols. And we're going to start off by looking at fractions. And so in our first example, we have 4/9 divided by 2/15. And remember with dividing fractions that you have two methods. You can either use the common denominator method, or you can multiply by the reciprocal. I'm going to show both of them just so that we can remember how each one of these work. Okay, so let's start with the common denominator method. If I look at the denominators, 9ths and 15ths, all right, a good common denominator, both of these numbers can go into 45. So let's change these so that they have a denominator of 45. Okay, the first denominator, 9, goes into 45 5 times. 9 times 5 is 45, so 4 times 5, that would turn into 20 45ths. And 15 to 45, 15 times 3 is 45, so 2 times 3 is equal to 6. So our new problem says 20 45ths divided by 6 45ths. And now that I've got common denominators, what I'm going to do is divide across. Okay, now I'm going to start with the denominator because that's the easy one. If you do 45 divided by 45, you just get a denominator of 1. Okay, in the numerators, if you do 20 divided by 6, well, that's not really going to work out nicely. So I'm just going to rewrite 20 divided by 6. Okay, so we've got this kind of weird looking fraction here, 20 divided by 6 all over 1. Okay, well, if your denominator is a 1, your answer is just going to be 20 divided by 6. Okay, so remember, you can rewrite this division problem as a fraction. Okay, so 20 divided by 6 is the same as 20 over 6. All right, and now looking at both of these numbers, I'm going to try to simplify. They're both even numbers, so I'm going to divide them both by 2. 20 divided by 2 is 10. 6 divided by 2 is 3. And now it's in simplest form, but my numerator is bigger than my denominator, so I'm going to rewrite it as a mixed number. 3 goes into 10 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9, so there's 1/3 left over. So the answer to this division problem that we started with, 4/9 divided by 2/15, is equal to 3 1/3. So again, that's the common denominator method. The other method, where you multiply by the reciprocal, you do not need to get common denominators. What we do is rewrite this division problem as a multiplication problem by keeping the first fraction the same and then multiplying by the reciprocal of the second fraction. Remember, reciprocal means that I'm going to switch the numerator and the denominator. So I'm going to keep the 4/9, and now instead of division, I'm going to multiply. And the reciprocal of 2/15 is 15 halves. 15 halves. So now it's this multiplication problem. And back when we looked at multiplying with fractions, we said that we should try to simplify early if possible. So I'm looking for a numerator and a denominator with a common factor. 4 and 2 have a common factor of 2. 2 goes into 2 once. 2 goes into 4 twice. All right, the numerator 15 and denominator 9 also have a common factor of 3. 3 goes into 9 3 times. 3 goes into 15 5 times. Okay, so now using my simplified versions here, I'm going to do numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. And when I do that, 2 times 5 is 10. 3 times 1 is 3. There's my 10/3, which I also had over here. And again, 10/3 is the same as 3 1/3. So either way that you do this, you get the same exact answer. Okay, both methods will give the same result. I'm going to let you choose whichever method you like best. If you're dividing with mixed numbers, though, remember to turn all of your mixed numbers into fractions first. Okay, so again, you can either get your common denominators or you can multiply by the reciprocal. All right, I kind of prefer method number 2. So that's the one I'm going to be using, but if you prefer method number 1, by all means, you're going to get the same exact answer. In example 2, we have 2 1/3 divided by 3 1/2. These are mixed numbers. And we had just said that if you're dividing with mixed numbers, remember to turn all of your mixed numbers into fractions first. So that's going to be the first thing that we do. Let's rewrite this so that my mixed numbers become fractions. 2 1/3, 3 times 2 is 6, 6 plus 1 is 7, so that's 7/3, divided by 2 times 3 is 6, 6 plus 1 is 7, so this is 7/2. So we have 7/3 divided by 7/2. And now again, you have two different methods. You can either use common denominators or multiply by the reciprocal. I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal, so I'm going to keep 7/3. And I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal of 7/2 is 2/7. And now I'm looking for a common denominator, a common factor before I multiply, so to see if I can simplify early. The 7 and the 7 have a common factor of 7. 7 goes into 7 once, so those both become 1s. No other simplifying can happen, so now I'm just going to multiply across. 1 times 2 is 2, 3 times 1 is 3. It's in simplest form, so the answer here is 2/3. In example 3, we're going to apply what we've learned. We're going to find each quotient, and this time make sure that you pay attention to the signs. So in example A, I have -5/6 divided by -2/9. Okay, these are both just fractions already, so I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. So this is going to be -5/6 times the reciprocal of -2/9 is -9/2, -9/2. And now I'm going to see if I can simplify. All right, the 9 and the 6 have a common factor of 3. 3 goes into 6 twice, into 9 3 times. And I think that's all the simplifying that I can do. So now I'm going to multiply across. So remember, first of all, with the signs, a negative times a negative is a positive. So I'm going to have a positive. 5 times 3 is 15. 2 times 2 is 4. So I have 15/4. And now make it a mixed number. 4 goes into 15 3 times. 4 times 3 is 12, so that means that there are 3/4 left over. And so the quotient this time is 3 3/4. In example B, again, we already have fractions, so I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. I'm going to keep the first fraction, -2/3. I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal of 24/27, which is 27/24. And now let's simplify. 27 and 3 have a common factor of 3. 3 goes into 3 once, into 27 9 times. 2 and 24 have a common factor of 2. 2 goes into 2 once, and into 24 12 times. And so now when I multiply a negative times a positive, I'm going to get a negative fraction. Negative 1 times 9 is 9. 1 times 12 is 12. -9/12, but this actually still simplifies down to -3/4. Both of these numbers were divisible by 3. In example C, I've got some mixed numbers. 3 1/2 divided by -1 2/5. I'm going to first make them fractions. 2 times 3 is 6. 6 plus 1 is 7, so this is 7/2 divided by negative. 5 times 1 is 5. And then plus 2 is 7, so this is 7/5, -7/5. Now let's multiply by the reciprocal. I'll keep 7/2 times the reciprocal of -7/5 is -5/7. Before I multiply, I can simplify my 7's in the numerator and the denominator. Those both become 1's. And now when I multiply, a positive times a negative is a negative. 1 times 5 is 5. 2 times 1 is 2. This is -5/2, which is the same as -2 1/2. So we just had a good review of dividing fractions, and now we'll do a good review of dividing with decimals. And there are a couple of different examples that we have to look at. The first example we're going to look at is when we have a whole number divisor. We have 20 8/10 divided by -16. This number that you're dividing by is called the divisor, and this divisor is whole. This is a whole number divisor. If you're dividing by a whole number, then the decimal in the dividend simply moves straight up into the answer. And so let's see what this looks like. Okay, remember, you can rewrite this division problem like a fraction. All right, the first number, 20 8/10, would be our numerator, and our denominator would be -16. And we want to do the division problem here. So what we're going to do, we're going to set up our long division. And the numerator is always what goes inside. Okay, so 20 and 8/10 is going to go inside of our division box. And we're dividing by negative 16. So again, if we're dividing by a whole number, then the decimal and the dividend simply move straight up into the answer. Okay, so let's go ahead and do our division. We'll worry about the signs at the end. 16 goes into 20 once. 1 times 16 is 16. So when we subtract, we're left with 4. We bring down the 8. Okay, make sure you're lining everything nicely up here. And now we have to figure out how many times 16 goes into 48. Well, 16 goes into 48 3 times. 3 times 6 is 18, carry the 1. 3 times 1 is 3, add 1 is 4. And look at that, we have a 0 remainder. And now pay attention to the signs. A positive divided by a negative would be a negative. And so our answer here is negative 1 3/10. Okay, so this is the easiest example if your divisor is a whole number. Again, just take the decimal and the dividend and move it straight up into your answer. So what happens if the divisor is a decimal? If you are dividing by a decimal, then you can just move the decimal point to the right until you create a whole number. For example, if we have 13 and 4/10 divided by 6/10, we're going to rewrite this as a division problem with fractions, and then we're going to ask ourselves what this division looks like. So 13 and 4/10, I'm going to write it just like that, 13 and 4/10 divided by 6/10. That's what it would look like with fractions. I'm going to make this mixed number a fraction. 10 times 13 is 130 plus 4, so this would be 134/10 divided by 6/10. And notice that these have common denominators. So if I were to divide across, the denominator would be a 1, and the numerator would be 134 divided by 6. So this just turns into the fraction 134 divided by 6. So if I were to make this a long division problem, again, the numerator goes inside the box, 134 divided by 6. Doesn't this look very similar to what we started with? Notice these are whole values. All we would have to do is move that decimal over to the right 1 time. So let's show that now. Okay, so we have 13 and 4/10 divided by 6/10. All right, inside would be 13 and 4/10 divided by 6/10. I want this number to be whole, so I'm going to move the decimal once to the right because that creates a whole number. And if I move it to the right once here, I've got to move it to the right once here. And now the decimal moves straight up into our answer. So let's go ahead now and do our division. 6 goes into 13 twice, so put the 2 above the 3. 2 times 6 is 12. When we subtract, we're left with 1. Bring down the 4. 6 goes into 14 twice again. 2 times 6 is 12. So when we subtract this time, we're left with 2. I'm going to add a 0 inside and bring it down. 6 goes into 23 times, so the 3 goes above that 0. 6 times 3 is 18. I subtract, I'm left with 2. And I add a 0 again, I bring it down, and I just did this. All right, 6 goes into 23 times. That's 18. I subtract, and notice what's happening here. We're just going to keep getting this over and over again. So this is going to be a repeated decimal. Okay, so we start out with 22, so our answer here is going to be 22, and it starts to repeat after the 10th place. So I'm going to mark this as a 3, and I'm going to put a bar over the top because that 3 is going to repeat forever. 22 and 3/10 repeated. In the next example, we have 8 divided by 1 1/10. 8 goes inside, 1 1/10 is outside. And again, I want this to be whole, so I'm going to move the decimal once to the right. So I need to do the same thing here. So there's where the decimal would be. I move it once to the right. I fill in the empty spot with a 0, and that decimal point comes straight up. And so now we have 80 divided by 11. 11 goes into 87 times. That's 77. When I subtract, I'm left with 3. Add a 0, bring it down. 11 goes into 30 twice. That's 22. I subtract, and I'm left with 8. And there's my 80 again. I know that goes in 7 times. There's my 77. I bring down a 0. 11 goes into 33 two times, and notice this will repeat again.